welcome to another edition of the Power Move Maker series. And today we have a very special guest in the building, an amazing journalist, writer, author, and a hell of a spades player. Please welcome to this week's Power Move Maker series, Miss Kim Osorio.
Hi, hey Shawn.
Hey Kim.
That intro made me feel so good. I tried to own my spades trophy. The fact that I was the champion of the 2005 Shawn Prez spades tournament.
Shout to Joe Button. I'm sure he's not going to be too happy with that.
Shout out to Joe Button, who I beat that year. And I'm sure he's still waiting for a rematch. I remember that. I remember that like it was yesterday. It was a lot of fun. I love that space tournament. You need to bring it.
I love it. So many people have been asking me to bring it back, so we definitely might be doing celebrity spades once again, bring back the whole crew. I told you, you and I got to do it together. That's the only way I'm doing it.
I want to. Listen, if I would have known we were going to go there, I would have sat here with my trophy. I still have it. I still have my trophy. I got to find it. But next time, I'm going to post it or something. I'm telling you, like.
So when we put this interview up, make sure you post it with your trophy.
I have absolutely gone on IG Live with that trophy just to remind people that I'm the one to play with.
Nice, nice. Speaking of trophies, you have a few. You have been a trophy in your own right to the hip-hop industry. And you're a fellow Bronx native like myself.
What part of Bronx you from?
South Bronx, Katona, Tremont area.
Oh.
How about you?
Castle Hill.
Now, everybody's from Castle Hill.
Is everyone from Castle Hill?
Everybody's from Castle Hill area.
We are a very, very, very talented bunch. But Castle Hill, but there is a bit of Grand Concourse in me as well.
Okay.
So it's kind of like all-encompassing of the Bronx. Different part. I was primarily raised in Castle Hill, but you know I lived in other areas during different years of my life. So I actually, for the younger years of my life, I grew up by Grand Concourse and 165th Street.
Okay, okay. Did you go to Kips Bay?
Did I go to Kips Bay? I used to work at Kips Bay.
No way.
Mm-hmm. I worked there. I was a cheerleading coach.
For anybody who doesn't know what Kips Bay is.
Kips Bay is a youth organization, a community center in the neighborhood. And I think it's probably most famous for being the place where Jennifer Lopez danced, right?
Jennifer Lopez danced there. Kerry Washington attended.
I didn't know that.
So many, Kerry Washington. It's so many of the greats were either part of Kips Bay or somehow have some affiliation. So I didn't even know you worked there. How about that?
I worked there. I brought a cheerleading program to Kips Bay. I actually, before I worked at Kips Bay, a lot of people don't know this as well. My parents are from Harlem. So, you know, I spent a lot of time there because I had a lot of family that lived there. I worked at Dunleavy Milbank, 118th Street. So it was one of my first jobs as a cheerleading coach. And I, you know, having been someone that kind of came up and went to all the cheerleading competitions back in my day, I brought that sort of different sort of structural cheerleading program to those centers and took those teams to the, I don't want to like racially define it, but basically like to the white competitions, you know, which were a new experience for girls that came from the Bronx or from Harlem because they had seen it differently. And I will say this, I remember back then how impressed because, of course, coming out of Milbank, coming out of Kips Bay, the dance movements that we had in our, you know, choreographed routines was something that those other teams had never seen before. So it was a great experience for I still get girls, I'm still in contact with some of those girls, but I still get a lot of them who reach out to me on Facebook, who reach out to me on Instagram now that we have these social media platforms, and are just thanking me for the experience that they had when I was their coach. So it was a very important time in my career, and something like a lot of people just don't know about me.
You know, you coming up in the Bronx, hip hop is in your blood. Like, it's no accident that you somehow find your way into the hip hop industry, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked this question a lot, and then at a certain point, I was like, I don't want to sound corny when I answer it, right? But first of all, I was raised by Video Music Box, Channel 31.
Like we all were.
I came home from school, and that's what I did, right? I had to come straight home from school. My mother wasn't having it. And I watched Video Music Box every day. I actually taped the videos on my Betamax and studied them, really, because I identified so much with the music. I mean, growing up, I came up in an era when I was in elementary school, people were like ripping leaf patches off of your jeans, right? Like, you had to have the new sheepskin, you had to get gazelles. Like, hip hop was just the dominant culture. And I think culturally for me, I identify most with it because of just my background is culturally diverse. So people, they don't really know. Like, at first they're like, oh, you're Puerto Rican, right? Because you're from Castle Hill and, your last name is Osorio. Well, my father's Puerto Rican and my mother's actually half Black, half Chinese. So I don't speak any Spanish. Like, I didn't identify culturally with just one group. I just had, like a lot of people in New York, this melting pot that I came up in. And hip hop was the thing that brought everyone together, right? Hip hop was that identifying culture. So for me, like, I came up, I used to walk home from school. There was it's that story that everyone tells, right? Like, I was walk home from school, there's cardboard boxes opened up on the floor and people are doing
dances. Yeah.
That's what my childhood was like, right? Like, going to the park jams, like watching DJs. Like, I'm fascinated still to this day by DJ culture. Like, it's my favorite thing to watch on Instagram right now. Like, I watch DJs all day long. I have to pace myself to work because I'll work and write with the DJ IG live in the background.
So let me ask you something. You just mentioned writing. Mm-hmm. Was writing always a big part of your life? Were you always creative and that was your way to express your creativity?
I always wrote, but I wasn't aware that writing was a profession, right? So, like, teachers would tell me, oh, you're a really good writer. But I didn't understand that creative expression could be a career. I kind of came up with parents who define success as like, you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Like, that's what it is. Like, we want you to be successful. You'll go to college. You'll be a doctor or a lawyer. It wasn't any music industry aspirations for me coming up. It was almost like there aren't too many jobs out there. Most of the jobs that I saw others, my friends' parents, like, they were all working class, blue collar jobs. So my mother's idea of me being successful was to go to college and go to law school. It wasn't to be a writer, but I went to law school and, I don't practice law, but I have that background. But a lot of people or a lot of lawyers are great writers. And I think that sort of kind of those worlds for me blended at a certain point when I became to understand that, that part of me, that sort of analysis, that critical thinking, the issue spotting, all the stuff that you learn in law school is a part of writing. And I think somewhere around my second or third year of law school, because I went at night, so I went for 4 years, I knew that I wanted to write professionally. It took me a long time to figure that out because I did not think that there was a lucrative career in writing.
That I'm so happy that you said that because I have a similar story, right? But as much as our parents want good for us, mm-hmm. and especially the generation before us, they worked hard and it was all about getting these conventional jobs. And I love the fact that you said you didn't recognize the thing that you love to do most, which was writing. That's actually a career choice. That's not just a hobby. It's not just something I do to express my creativity, but I can never make money off it. And for anybody who's watching this interview, I think it's so important that, number one, if you are doing something that you love, 9 out of 10, there's a way to make money at it.
Right.
But if you are the parent to a child or children who they may not be taking the most conventional, or they're not excelling in school. Although we all as parents, we want our children to excel in school. Education, 100%, I'm behind it. But if your child is not doing what is traditional or conventional, support them anyway, because there are these non-conventional talents that, people can make a lot of money and can make a career and have a very, very lucrative and good life. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and it's hard. I understand. My mother was someone who, she had 14 brothers and sisters. They grew up in like a 2-bedroom apartment
Wow.
in Harlem, right? Like a 3-bedroom or whatever it was. It wasn't a lot of bedrooms for 14 people. And they all kind of had to find their way, and they grew up in the 50s and 60s, right? So there was a lot of struggle that she went through. The same for my father. And so I understand the thinking when they were able to get out of where they were from. I have this joke actually where I say, like, growing up, I grew up in Castle Hill, but I thought I was middle class. Right, because we had a house right down the block from Castle Hill Projects, but I wasn't in the projects. But I had a house, so I thought I was middle class, but really, like, it was the same thing as like being there. And I saw a lot as a child, and my parents, they tried to shelter me from the streets, but there's only so much that you can do when you live in that environment, and your parents are working. My mom had 3 jobs. My father he ran numbers. So I always stutter when I say that, because as a child, I could not own that, right? Like, you went to school and people said, what does your father do? And I couldn't answer that. I'm like, he works at a grocery store, like I could never say that. Nowadays, my father's in his 60s. He's doing okay down in Florida. Ain't nobody going to get him. So I can pretty much own the fact that he ran numbers. So there was no consistency or stability in our lifestyle, right? So they just wanted what they knew would be success for me. They wanted me to go to college, and that was a big thing because they never went to college. And then, beyond that, my mom wanted me to she still calls me to this day. She's like, when are you going to take the bar? I'm like, I don't think I want to practice law, but because in her mind, that's what success is, right? Like lawyer, doctor, those careers. They don't necessarily see what I do. I mean, now they do. Like, my mom will be like, what's that show you work on? What? It comes on VH1? Is it really popular? Someone at the market heard of it, right? That's what my mom, she'll call me from, the market after she's met someone, because she's told, them, my daughter is an executive producer on Love and Hip Hop. You know that show? And they, of course, know the show, but my mother has no concept of how successful the show is. She didn't have a concept when I worked at The Source of how successful that magazine was. She just used it in conversations when she met people, like, this is what my daughter does. And so for her, I think just to see me be able to kind of hold down this career it's new for her. It's new because our parents didn't come up thinking, that was an avenue we could pursue, especially when I'm listening to, 98.7 Kiss and WBLS on weekends and taping the rap shows. They're just thinking that's it's a fad, or it's just music.
Exactly. a lot of people in the generation prior to ours, they didn't see this as a real way to make a living. It just was, it's cool, but now go out and get a real job.
Right.
So I totally get it.
Right.
Law school. Did you go to law school because it was expected of you, or did you at one point actually want to be a lawyer?
I never really knew what I wanted. I still, you know, in this age, sometimes I'm like, what do you want to do? Like, I still don't know, because I'm a Gemini, so I never really have an answer. It's always indecisiveness for me. So coming out of college, I didn't know what I wanted to do.
What'd you major in college?
I majored in fine arts.
Okay.
I majored in fine arts, and I switched my major 3 times. This is to all the college kids out there that don't know what they want to do and they're changing their major. It's fine. No one cares. Just do really well. I went to school and I started off as a political science major. Then I went to computer science. Then I went to communications. And finally, I landed on fine arts. And I'm so happy about that, because in my last 2 years of college, I figured out that I could do better in school if I took classes that I enjoyed.
Amen.
And that nurtured me, right? So like, I love the arts. I love, you know, dance. I took dance classes. I took art history. I took music history, music theory, like all the stuff that I was interested in that I never thought was or could be a major was kind of lumped into this fine arts major at Fordham University. And I excelled at that and I loved it. So like all of the courses that I took before that, because I felt like this is what I'm supposed to do. Oh, I'm supposed to be a communications major, or I'm supposed to be, you know, into political science. Horrible grades, because I was not interested in it the way that I was when I got to major in fine arts. And then outside of that, I just figured law school was something that I knew I could do. I was like, I really took the LSAT on some, like, let me see if I can get into law school. Oh shit, you got in. Well, you should go. That's what happened. If I'm being really honest, that's what happened. And the minute I told, of course, my mom that I wanted to, you know, go to law school, she's all excited, and my sister. So I was like, not doing anything else, I might as well go. And I went at night while I worked at a music software company, which is a very important job that I should talk about here.
Let's hear it.
Okay. So in the 90s, from 94 to 99, I had a job at a software company called Muse, right? This company provided the information. This is before the internet's blowing up, all of that, for Tower Records and a lot of the record stores that would have this kiosk in the record store. I don't know if you remember this, where if you needed to know information about music, you would go to this kiosk and I want to buy this record, and you would type in, you know, Tupac, right? Let's say, what's that song by Tupac? Oh, Keep Your Head Up. You would type it in, and all of the information from Keep Your Head Up, who you know, what record was sampled, where the song was recorded, who performed on the song, who did the background vocals, like all of that stuff was entered into this database. And I was the only hip hop person at the time, or person from this culture, that was working there for those years until later, right? So like in the beginning, basically anything that came out during 94 and 99, I physically got the CD, opened up the notes, and entered all of the data. So because I have a good memory, I retained a lot of that information, right? So like when I was there when Reasonable Doubt came out, right? No one knew of Jay-Z really. You get the advanced copy, but here I have the entire, you know, credits. I'm listening to the music and I'm entering the information from that into this database, which would later be sold after the company was dissolved because of the internet, which would later be sold to like companies like Amazon and all of that information. So I basically retained a lot of information about music from in that time period, from in the 90s, right? Just because I had to enter this information into the database. And at that point, they started to critique music. And I started to write small annotations, small descriptions on a lot of the hip hop that was coming through. And that's really how I got into writing about music, because I lucked up on this job, this full-time job, entering music information. And I started to review and I had to review pretty much everything, right? So I had to listen to pretty much everything that came out during that time.
Were you enjoying the job at that point?
I loved that job. I sat there and listened to music all day long, and that's why my typing is so fast as well, because I was just like typing, all of the credits from all of the albums that were coming out back then.
And I asked you this because I actually spoke to some kids earlier today. And one of the things that I was helping them to understand is, our journey, we don't understand it at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's so important that you stop looking ahead. You can set your goals, you can do whatever, but enjoy the journey, enjoy the ride, because we haven't gotten into your full story yet.
Right.
Obviously, I know it. A lot of the audience is going to learn it. But God has this thing so divinely laid out that when you look backwards, you understand, oh, I did this, and it led me to that, and it led me to this. So I didn't even know this part of your story right here, but it makes total sense for everything else that you've done in your career, especially the next part of your journey. So it's just amazing. And for anybody who is watching this or listening to it on audio podcast, really embrace where you're at now. I don't think God puts us in any situations by chance. It's never random. It is always to help give you experience or expose you or put you in a position for something that is coming your way in the near future.
It's so funny you say that. So that job I had for 5 years, right? And I would say around 96, after I started writing about music, I was pitching my articles to different magazines, because now I wanted to, when you're writing about music back then, you want to eventually write for The Source. And that's where I wanted to be, because we would also get the magazines. We entered reviews as well from the magazine. So, I, of course, wanted to be at The Source at the time.
But for anybody who doesn't know what The Source meant to the world of hip hop, can you explain for 1 second?
The Source was like the premier hip hop magazine. It was the first magazine that really covered hip hop, not just from the music angle, but really from the cultural and political angle as well. So it was a very powerful company back then, because everyone knows if it was like if The Source said it, it was true. It wasn't, you had a lot of fanzines back then. You were able to get interviews from different magazines that were out. But The Source was really that first true hip hop publication. And so for me at the time, as I started to write, I wanted to become a writer at The Source or for The Source. And working for this company, I'm there. Like you said, I didn't know how blessed I was to be there, or how much information I was consuming and how relevant that would be to my career later on. I'm just kind of at Muse. The company was called Muse. Like, when am I going to get a job at one of these magazines? I just want to be like one of those writers, those were people interviewing the artists, and they became, they really built their careers off of some of the best writing of our day. And so that to me was the goal. So I just, I sat there at that job for 5 years thinking, although I love what I did, when is The Source going to call me to go work there? That's all I cared about. And people would say, you're going to be there someday. Like people that I work with, like you'll be at one of these magazines. Like the magazines were where you wanted to be, not a company like Muse, which really for me was giving me a lot of knowledge that I don't think people, and I'm not going to take anything away from anyone, but back then I don't think people were studying it the way I was forced to study it in my job.
You, and I'm assuming while you were at Muse, you said you were going to law school at night.
Mhm.
When did you transition out of Muse and finally get a job in the industry?
Oh, well, okay. So I think around 96, I start writing for these publications. People, being in New York, right? Like being from the Bronx, I knew people already. So I had a lot of, you know, I went out. Like I went to the clubs. Wait, let me just say, I went to the clubs. Like so, I met people. I had access, right? So, back then everyone knew where to be. Like depending on whatever. I don't know if it's like that these days, but like you knew where to be on Tuesday nights. You knew where to be on Saturday nights. There was a specific crowd of people on the come up, and I somehow got into that crowd just through my friends, my affiliations, just, meeting people, being social. And that gave me access. And coupled with the knowledge, right, that opened up the doors for me to start writing for bigger publications because I knew that I could freelance. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I could get an interview with so-and-so, or I would get along with this person, or I could figure out, like everyone in this industry, at least for us, right, is 2 degrees removed. If I don't know you, then my friend knows you, or I can get you on the phone through so-and-so. And that was the early stages of that, right? Like as I was meeting people and coming up, I was able to say to a magazine like XXL or The Source or Vibe, look, I can get an interview, with so-and-so. And that helped as well. Then there was editors who I became friendly with, right? Like Elliot Wilson, Carlito Rodriguez, like, these were people who, Riggs Morales, like we're like, oh, I'm gonna, assign these stories to Kim. And I kind of got my foot in the door with The Source through Elliot. Then in turn through Carlito, Riggs, like I began building relationships with the editors at magazines. And then eventually, this was the big move, okay? I said, I gotta move to Brooklyn. So in 98, because that's where it was, in 98, I said, see you, Bronx. And I had to move to that area. I moved to Clinton Hill in Brooklyn. And that's really where the relationships started to take off. And I started to get my foot in the door. Eventually, when Elliot got promoted to editor-in-chief at XXL, he offered me a job there. I went to XXL for a month. He wanted to kill me. And then Carlito offered me the job at The Source. And I took the job at The Source a month later. So, that's where I wanted to be. So in January of 2000, I started working at The Source magazine.
Okay, stop there for 1 second. Mm-hmm. Great story, by the way. Mm-hmm. XXL, what was your title?
Lifestyle editor. Here's a funny thing, too. Elliot was paying me more. I can say the number now. It doesn't matter anymore, right? Look, I was getting, Elliot, I think, was offering me like $55,000 a year. I laugh at it now, but I'm like, back then.
Big money. That's big money back then.
I was like, and The Source wasn't offering me that much. But I wanted to be at The Source so bad that I left. Because I said, first of all, I'm not a lifestyle editor, right? I took the job because I wanted to be at the magazine so bad. And Elliot had an opening for a lifestyle editor, which was, an editor responsible for a lot of the content in the front of the book, right? So like content, I remember back then, like something I did that he really liked was like recipes with Miss Wallace, like things like that in the magazine that weren't music focused. But I wanted to write about the music. And when The Source gave me the offer, it was to be a part of the music department. These are defined lines that people may not be aware of, but The Source critiquing music was what I wanted to do. And so when that job came, it was a lower level position. It didn't pay me as much. I took that position just so that I can be a part of the music department and write about music.
I love that you're bringing these things up. You're dropping so many gems, and you are providing wisdom, because people, they look at the paycheck. They look at, this job pays me more. But is it really what you want to do? Is it really how you want to spend 8, 9, 12 hours of your day? And although you finally made your way into a publication, you're working alongside of Elliott Wilson.
Elliott wanted to
This is,
look, he wanted to kill me when I took the Source job, because he was building his team. And that, you know, he had his own history at the Source, and, you know, he went to XXL, and he was now like going to take that magazine, you know, and try to really knock the Source out of its spot. And he built his team, and like I had just gotten hired. And once that Source job came, I was just like, gotta go.
yeah, but on the surface, it may have looked like you took a step back.
Mm-hmm.
But really, even though you were making less money and now being allowed to do exactly what you wanted to do,
yep,
you really took a giant leap forward. So please, if you're ever in a position like this, anybody who's watching or listening to this, you can't measure whether you should be at a job, or you can't measure the success of a position based on the paycheck. You just can't. Go do something you love to do, because that's where you're going to excel. So you get over to the Source. What's your position?
Associate music editor.
You're finally able to write about the artist. It's your dream job.
Your dream job, absolutely.
You did something unprecedented. You come in at the Source. You're working there for how long?
So I get there January 2000. I left in March of 2005. So I was there for 5 years.
Okay. I'm really asking, how long before you got in the big seat?
Editor-in-chief.
Editor-in-chief.
About 2 years.
Incredible, Kim.
2.5 years.
Incredible. This is somebody who was at the Muse, working at the Muse 5
Yep.
years prior.
Yep.
Dreaming of one day working at the Source.
Mm-hmm.
You get in at the Source, you bust your butt,
Mm-hmm.
and within 2 years of being there, editor-in-chief.
Yep, 2.5, yeah.
Incredible.
Yep. And it was, you know, remember, it was a tumultuous time at the Source, right? Like the Source had just gotten new investors. Remember, like there was that whole, you know, this is at the time when the internet was really starting to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Source poured a lot of money into the internet, and it didn't do well, right? Because everyone was trying to figure it out, and no one really knew what that formula was for success on the internet. And I remember when Black Enterprise put like all of this money into the Source, and it was a huge deal, the investment at the time. And it was a big time for the Source magazine. There had never been a woman in the editor-in-chief role. Now there
You
were
the first and only editor-in-chief at the Source. Am I correct?
No. I was the first woman to take that post, editor-in-chief.
Has there ever been a woman since then?
Yes, there was a woman a few years ago, boss lady Simone. I don't know if you know Simone. So she, you know, but this is more recent, right? Like this is in the new regime, because the Source has this whole new regime under Londell. So that
Under Londell McMillan.
Right, that happened a lot later. But this is the, you know, this is the prime time. We're talking the prime time of the Source. I can get in my bag a little bit, right? We're talking, you know, the Dave and Ray days, you know, the big controversial days, and the highest selling magazine at the time, right? Like this is when the Source really dominated in the culture. And so to have that job was a lot of pressure. But I think really You know, it's something that after, you know, my path and everything that I've been through, I've become comfortable with years later, right? Like even when I walk on set today and I see my cast, and I've been in reality TV for, I don't know, what, 7 years now, damn near. They say, there's Kim from the source. It's like a joke, right? Because that stamp is on me for life.
You know, Kim, I got a question for you. You get the editor-in-chief position at the Source after being there 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to wear the crown.
Right.
But heavy is the crown.
Mm-hmm.
When you got that position, looking back, were you ready for it?
I was never ready for anything that I've ever dealt with in my life. So
what does that mean exactly?
I wasn't ready for any kid that I had. Never ready. You're never ready. Everyone tells me when they're having kids, they're like, I don't think I'm ready for a baby. I'm like, nobody's ever ready. Okay. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for the job at the Source. Anything that I do in life, I'm never fully ready for it. Right. Because you can always prepare more. And I feel like when I got that job, I wasn't ready, but who's to say the next person was ready as well. Right. It's a learning experience. And in most positions, you really learn as you're doing them. So I wasn't trained to do that job. Like
That's why I'm asking. That's literally why I'm asking.
Look, I'll tell you how it happened. Carlito resigned, right? There were things going on behind the scenes, and no one knew who was going to get the job. So there was a lot of shadiness going on, right? Like then now certain people think somebody else is going to get the job. So they're being friends with them, you know, like people are hating on you. There's all this type of stuff happening, right? And before anyone knew anything, Benzino comes in my office. And now this was like 3 weeks or so before it was even announced. And he shuts the door and he's like, you're going to get the job. I'm going to make you the next editor-in-chief. And I was just looking at him like, is this a secret? Don't tell nobody yet. I just want you to know that. So whatever you want to do, just know, we behind you. And walked out.
This is how you knew you were getting the job.
That's how I knew, right? But I don't, nothing is ever guaranteed. So I'm kind of like, wow, that was promising. But for the next couple of weeks, I had to navigate in the office with this information, knowing this, but yet not being able to own it or to tell anybody. So it's very tough for me because you're working with people and you want to make a decision, right? Like, well, I think this is the best thing, or, this is what we should do. And people are like, no, we're not going to do that. And you're like in your head thinking, well, really, he told me I got the job, right? But as we all know, when you get into certain positions, any position, it really, it depends on where you are, but you can't always look at this hierarchy structure, right? You have to learn how to work with people on your level, with people under you, how to make people under you work for you, how to carry that stuff out. So that was the biggest learning experience there, because I had to figure out how to politically maneuver people that didn't know I was about to get the job. And I ended up getting the job. And then I found out, this is a little behind the scenes source stuff. I found out that there was a petition for someone else to get the job. And a lot of people had signed, because they knew I was up for it. So a lot of people had signed this petition for someone else to get the job.
Oh, wow.
It hurt my feelings.
Wow.
Why would people say, it hurt my feelings. And I think that it wasn't personal towards me, but it was really their support of someone else. But as the story goes, in that time and in that regime, you can't boss down the bosses and what they want. So probably the worst thing you can do for someone else is try to put something to, especially, you know, the history of petitions and things at the source, letters at the source. This isn't new.
Correct.
I think that was more damaging. Doing that was more damaging to just the staff environment than just kind of sitting and waiting to see what decision was going to be made. But the source was someplace, let me just say this, it's always been that place where everyone has always felt like no one owns, you know what I'm saying? No matter who's in charge, it belongs to us. People have always felt like the source belongs to us. So, you know, and then the story goes in so many different places.
Yes, your story definitely goes in so many different places. You're at the source for 5 years.
Uh-huh.
You get the big seat 2.5 years in. When did it start going left?
For me, when the Eminem thing happened, the Eminem Benzino battle,
Okay.
everything was great going up until that point. But when that happened, I think that's when all hell broke loose at the source. And you know, I wrote a book about it. People know what went down, but that kind
I
of.
want to bring people to your book because I want to pull them through your story.
Right.
So some people who are watching this may not be aware of this part of not just source history, but hip hop history.
Hip hop history, yep.
For sure.
Yep.
So you just mentioned the Eminem Benzino battle.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate? And I don't want to get too deep into that because I want to keep it focused on you.
Remember that? So Eminem was an artist that, you know, the source had in the Unsigned Hype column. So the source had always had like a really good relationship with him. And I don't know what the first thing was that happened, but it became, you know, Benzino put out a record about Eminem, then Eminem responded. Then it became really this big war between Eminem and the magazine. And we ended up doing a big story with some tapes that we found. You know, so there's so much there. It's hard to kind of sum it up.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say from a business standpoint, Eminem, Interscope Records, they ended up pulling all of their advertising from the magazine. And that was
hurt the source.
That really hurt the source, right?
Really hurt the source. I remember that time well.
Yep.
Going back to you, you end up leaving the source not on good terms.
No, I got fired.
Wasn't on good terms. I'm trying to say it nicely.
I was terminated on the phone. Yes, by Benzino.
Oh, it was over the phone?
Absolutely. He called my phone. He was yelling at me for something. It's in the book. I can't remember exactly, but I forgot what we were arguing over. I think it was building, right? Like this Eminem drama, you know, like everything I was going through. I think they felt like I wasn't, you know, kind of, you know, I was torn, and maybe I wasn't carrying out the agenda the way they wanted to. I don't remember what their reasons were. But for me, I was going through some other things, and people are familiar with the lawsuit. And I
want to talk about that lawsuit because I feel like you were so far ahead of your time. Can we pivot there for 1 second?
We can pivot there. It's a long story, and it was I always say #me first because I don't feel like back then people were very supportive of what I decided to do, right? And although people had their own experiences in the industry or at that particular magazine, because of whatever was going on internally between me and Ray and Dave, I don't know, but there wasn't this sort of rally of like, here's a woman who is fighting, you know, for that cause.
Kim, I just want to bring our listeners up to speed. For anybody who doesn't know your story intimately, you, and this is why you say me first, you did something that was unprecedented at the time, especially in entertainment. You bring a lawsuit against the source, uh, sexual harassment, defamation, gender bias, and I believe there were a couple other things.
There was four main claims. It was gender discrimination, sexual harassment, defamation, and what I consider to be the most important claim, retaliation. Because
Retaliation.
the claims that I won on were defamation and retaliation. Now, I filed a complaint before I was fired. And I think that complaint really kind of set things in motion. I was fired.
You found a complaint for what exactly?
For discrimination.
Before you were fired.
Within the right, and they immediately fired me when I filed that complaint. So the lawsuit, which I was fired in 2005, and the lawsuit came out. We went to court in 2006, but I don't think people knew the details of what was happening. What was important to remember, or what is important to remember for me, was that I had gone to law school. So I had sat through employment discrimination law, employment law, right? And all the while, I knew that a lot of what was happening was wrong. Did I put my head down while I was working and just, yeah, I did not say anything right away. I didn't, I had this big job. I didn't stand up like, this is wrong. Like, they can't do that, or they shouldn't do. I never did that. So when I did decide to do it, I think people felt like, well, she never did it before. She never said anything. She was cool with it. So we're not going to, support her. But I think, now as we're seeing with a lot of stories that are coming out now, people held on to their stuff for 20 some odd years. I held on to mine for 2 years. At the 2-year mark, I was like, I can't take it anymore, but I said something essentially, and I filed the lawsuit, and we went to federal court on that. Like,
can you walk me through, and I'm so sorry to cut you off. What I'm interested in, it's a male-dominated industry.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, Ray Benzino, Dave Mays, huge players in the game. Huge
Mm-hmm.
players in the game. Iconic magazine, iconic brand. I'm sure you must have had a lot of restless nights, even coming to the decision of, this is the action that I need to take, because there was no Me Too movement at that time.
Not at all.
Everybody in the music industry, and if you want to get more specific, hip hop,
Mm-hmm.
we all know each other.
Mm-hmm.
So you were putting a target on your back, because if I go ahead with this, there's a good chance that everything I've worked for up until this point in my career, I could lose. Mm-hmm. Who's going to want to work with me again? What's the mindset of a person in your position at that time, if you can remember?
Okay, so because I've kind of, this is what, 15 years ago, right? And I've done a lot of self-reflecting. I am more comfortable with understanding who I am and why I've made the decisions that I've made in life, right? And what I can own now, and what I know for sure, is that I do things out of a place of hurt, right? So I was hurt by the source, because it was everything to me back then, right? Like, I had this big job. This was, something that it really defined me. And it was, I didn't know where I was going from there, right? So to be fired at that point in time, with no plan, by people who I really looked at as my family, right? Like, when we get into jobs, and particularly in this industry, it's like all in, right? So that was like my family. And mind you, let me just say this, because this is also, from a place of, I didn't have any brothers growing up, right? So this is my family. And I get fired. It's like my family just puts me out. I was hurt. I was like, wait a minute, you can't do that to me. And my hurt sometimes supersedes my thought process, right? I'm learning how to control my emotions and my reactions to things. So when I filed it, I wasn't looking for any money. I wasn't, and it's interesting too, because people thought like, well, how much money to make this go away? And I was like, I'm not doing this for money, and I know now that I was hurt and that was the motivating thing. But being hurt coupled with knowing what they had done was against the law, to me, it was like, I'm going to go all the way. So I didn't even understand at the time. You asked a very important question when you said, were you ready for the job? I wasn't ready for the job. I wasn't ready for my kids. I wasn't ready to file a lawsuit because I didn't understand the bigger picture back then. And that's probably why I did not get the support that I needed, because really I should have kind of had a group of women around me to say, we're going to support you. But I didn't. I was so hurt. I said, I'm going. And I've always sort of tackled things from the standpoint of, I don't need anyone. I'll do it on my own, right? Like I just told you before we started this interview, right? I said, I painted my house. Everyone's like, what you painting your own house for? You could just hire someone. I'm like, I don't know, because I could do it by myself. I don't need anybody to paint my house. It's just a mentality that I've always had. I don't know if it's part of where I come from. And I think it's what, it's a learning experience, right? I filed that case. It was way before its time. And I didn't even understand at the time how important it was.
Extremely significant. Extremely significant. And you bring up something that I want to shine a light on. I understand with the type of lawsuit that you filed, having men say, whoa, let me stay clear of this.
Right.
Let me stay clear of you. Mm-hmm. But you had women who didn't support you. I mean, of course, we're in a different world at this point.
Right.
You have women who didn't come to your defense. Am I correct?
I am. I mean, I did have a lot of women that behind the scenes were like, go, girl, go. But they wouldn't do it publicly, And I think one of the reasons was because, something that I don't think any men can do nowadays. This is only 15 years ago, right? So like, I liken it to when you walk down the street and a guy tries to talk to you and you don't turn around and you become a bitch or a hoe, right? I filed the lawsuit and the defense they had was, she's a hoe, right? And this is a conversation I have with women all the time, particularly younger women who are, in the industry and have dealt with this, because you still have that attack on women, right? So that became a defense strategy, right? And for me, I dealt with that because I kind of laughed at it behind the scenes with my friends. I'm like, how are they going to say that? They say that about all women. But there were people who actually ran with it. And some of those people, I look at nowadays, they would never run with it now, right? Like I see it and I say, that's interesting, because when I did this 15 years ago, right, it was always like, well, wait a minute. What if she really is a hoe, right? That is so significant because, and I'm not one of those women that kind of, like, let's do the slut walk. I'm not doing that, right? I am very strong in my position as a woman, and I have always been. And just being someone who has taken these courses in law school and being able to say, that is not a defense. You can't talk about, anything that a woman has done that has nothing to do with the lawsuit that's being filed. But back then, you couldn't separate it. People, even in the media, couldn't separate it, right? Like, they were writing articles about me and about my dating history or relationship history or whatever you want to call it, or however you want to define it. They mixed it in with the claims. It has nothing to do. You can't do that now. You can't do that now. If you go out there and file a lawsuit, you can't talk about a girl who she was with the year before. What does it have to do with the claims, you know what I mean, that you're setting forth? But that's what happened back then, because people, the lawsuit was so new, people didn't understand, you know, the difference, right? Or that we're supposed to separate this, right? It's something that, I mean, when you got to court, the minute someone said it on the stand, the judge was like, objection. What are you doing? You know, they brought people to court to actually blurt things out. The lawyer was like, the judge was like, I'm going to fine you. Do not even go there. Objection, you know, you can't do that in a court of law, but it was a defense strategy to deflect the attention.
That's insane.
It is, because it's something that I think, you know, I deal with this. I talk to a lot of younger girls. I have a lot of mentees, and I talk to them just about their own struggles and what they're going through. And I coach them, and I often feel like a lot of what I say is being negated by what other women are saying, or maybe people who have, or even other, you know, not just women, but other men, like, you know, telling them like, oh, be careful who you date out here. Be careful who you date, because your dating history, your dating has nothing to do with what you do professionally. And those are two separate things. And that's the advice I give to young women, right? Like, but we're still in that place for women where those lines are very blurred.
You ultimately win this lawsuit. Did you find in the winning, you were somehow vindicated? Because yes, you won, but I gotta believe, and I'll ask it, on the other hand, you were blackballed. You were put in a position where nobody wants to touch you.
Right.
What was that like?
Well, and let me just start by saying, shout out to Rhonda Cowan, who hired me.
My girl, Rhonda, shout out to Rhonda. We were talking about Rhonda offline, but shout out to my girl, Rhonda.
Right, at BET, about 8 months after I filed the lawsuit and all this stuff was public. But she's a very different type of woman, right? Like, that's my friend to this day because of her values and just in terms of how we connect on some woman stuff, right? She was someone I did not know back then in the industry. I just knew of her, or she knew of me, and I got the job as what was my title? Executive editor at BET.com. It was a time where digital was really flourishing. It was a great time for me to transition to digital. And it's actually how I got into television. And she took a chance on me. Like, we had an interview, and I ended up with the job at BET. And it was a great job for my career. I was there for 6 years. So, you know, luckily there are people out there who understand what's really important, who want to hire the best person for the job, because that's, you know, really what it was. It was like, I know you can do this job, right? I know you can get these interviews and report, like, and that's what they were looking for at the time. So it took a while. I was out of work for about 8 months, but again, I think everything happens for a reason. And there were people that did not want to hire me. There were people that called me up, like, what are you doing? Why are you going there? How do we make this go away? Mostly men, unfortunately, I have to say. You know, and that bothered me, because it was like, no, this is now about, and once it got personal, then I didn't want to make it go away. I was like, oh, okay, we're going to go to court now. You know, oh, we're going there, you know. And I started to learn along the way that I was fighting for something bigger. And there was, you know, I don't want to make it seem like I didn't get support. There was support there along the way. There was support there. But
no, I was going to ask you that question. I'm sorry, say that again.
Not like there would be now. Like, there was support along the way, but it was a lot of behind the scenes, quiet support. Not in the way that, you know, you hear a woman kind of talk about their struggle now, and it's like everyone is like ready to throw up the protest signs. But back then it was a different time.
A very different time. And I'm glad you said that there was some support. that was there for you. That's great. Uh, it's amazing irony that happened somewhere in your story. You wound up back at the source.
I do.
You like literally you wind up back at the source. How'd that happen?
Well, so I'm at BET for 6 years, and um, I really am starting to understand digital, understand television, and want to bring this sort of multi-platform approach to the source. In the meantime, I'm sure people know a little bit about the history. They source is under new ownership. And so Londell takes over the source. I forgot, Londell McMillan, the attorney, takes over. I forgot what year that he took over, but he was revamping the brand. And, you know, I knew Londell. I had a relationship with Londell, and we talked, and he, you know, I was like, you know what, I think it's time. And I also felt like I wasn't able to leave gracefully the first time. So I wanted to go back, and I wanted to sort of finish what I felt like I never had a chance to finish. It was a weird time also for me, I think, because my book had come out, and I really, professionally and mentally, I was 100% in television. So I think, you know, I left after, I don't know, maybe a year or so, just because I wanted to pursue other opportunities. Like, I was like, no, I really want to do this television thing. And I don't know if the source at the time was ready to really kind of go full steam ahead with TV. So I did come back. I was there for a while, and it was a great moment, I think, just for me to be able to go back to the source, to be able to celebrate the brand, to work with Londell on the things that he was doing at the time. So it's a cool end, I think, to my story at the source. And I still feel like the brand is a big part of me. And Londell knows if he needs anything that he can call me, you know, and we can work together on other things in the future.
No, I think it's so great that he stepped up, and I'm happy that you were able to get the closure you needed from that part of your life, from that brand. So that's a really great footnote to this story. I just want to switch to a different topic. You know, your first love is writing, it's creativity. Is there room for magazines and publications in the industry the way that it once was?
Um, I think well, the game has changed, right? So I don't know if I necessarily want to flip through a magazine anymore. That's just me, right? My preference when I've become so engaged in the digital age, right? And everything is at my fingertips. Um, there's always room for the content. It's always about the content.
But is the content now, is it video? Is it, you know, I'll be more specific with my question. If you're a writer, if you're a young writer, if you're in college right now, if you're somebody who is working a full-time job and you know that's not for you, I want to write.
Uh-huh.
Is there room for me? You know,
Absolutely, but I would say there's more opportunity. There's always room. There's more opportunity for you in the mobile space. That's what I would say right now. I would be like, figure out, you know, how to go write for the next great content app, right? That's going to give or serve the audience that is looking for content in your particular genre, right? I think that the voices that we have online, I feel like with the with social media and the way that we consume content now, there's a focus not so much on bigger brands, but on individual brands, right? So your voice, in essence, can be heard even more just on a personal level, right? We follow now, when you think about who you follow on social media, we don't necessarily follow the brands. We follow the people who make the brands. So we follow the tastemakers and the leaders in the culture. And I think that's a big statement to just even what built the Source back then, right? Like before I started working at the Source, of course the brand was bigger, but I knew who the writers were. I could name the writers and the articles I read because I would look at the bylines. And that's what we're seeing now. Like you're seeing all this content and you know who owns the content. You know the content that you like to follow. And the brand is just a platform for, you know, distribution, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's, you know, Tidal, whether, you know, it's, you know, a network like BET or, you know, a brand like XXL or Source. Yeah, but you still want to hear from the voices who make that, you know, the authorities on the culture. So I would say there's always that opportunity for writing, just because it's not in print, or that you can touch and hold it. Like, you know, I'll say this, right? Like I had this project. Remember this?
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
I had this project that I was kind of going through some of my old articles, and that's a big story for me, that Foxy Brown, because that was the first cover story I wrote, right? Is this it? Yeah, it's not, she's not on the cover, but because you get a cover line at the time, that was considered like, it's like a cover story, right? It's like one of the big features, yep. And so this article here was a big sort of thing for me because I got a cover line, and it was the first one I got. I can't find it right now. But again, see how thick it was back then? The content is still there, right? You can, it's not going to be the same type of article with all of this. Look, she even had a poster. That's funny, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So that article was big for me back then. This is like before, this was January 99, before I had my job at the Source. So, you know, do I still want to read that article as, you know, someone who loves hip hop and consumes content? Absolutely. But do I want to hold it in my hand and flip through it? You know, the younger generation, they're not used to this. They're used to, they just pull up their mobile phone and, you know, go into whatever app they have. So it's just a different time, but the voices are still there.
It is, but the opportunity, you're saying, if you are writing, there is opportunity still out there for you.
Right.
So I know your heart has been in TV for some time now. Co-executive producer on one of the most popular, long-running reality TV shows, Love and Hip Hop.
I'm an EP. Don't take away my credit.
Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. Executive producer.
Like my third EP credit. Don't take it. Yeah.
How did that come about for you? Were you and Mona friends? Like, how'd that job come?
But that happened. So I've known Mona for a long time. Before I started working on Love and Hip Hop, well, actually, I was scripting for the reunion shows first. So going back to my days at BET, in the digital department, I worked a lot, you know, with linear, and I also was scripting some of the countdown shows, right? So I got into scripting for television while I was working at BET. So I even like, there's even like an Aaliyah special that I wrote back then. Like I tried my hand at scripting. When I left BET and went to the Source and I did that show, The Gossip Game, I reconnected with Mona. And then after that show, I started scripting for the reunion shows. So I would write the scripts for Love and Hip Hop reunion shows. And that was a lot of fun, just because I'm sure, as you guys know, how much goes into the reunion show tapings on Love and Hip Hop. But then I said, I think I want to start building story on the story side in episodic. And so I started working with different production companies. I worked with Big Fish for a while on a few different shows like Hustle and Soul. I worked with E1 on shows like Hustle in Brooklyn. There's a lot of hustling out there. And Growing Up Hip Hop, New York. I did Black Ink Chicago. So I started to like move around in the reality space and just kind of I wound up back at Big Fish when Big Fish and Mona Me merged to do Love and Hip Hop season 10. So I actually did season 8 as a story czar, which was a co-EP role, but then came back as showrunner for season 10. So that has been super busy and exciting. It's been a whirlwind and time is just flying. But season 10 has been a big deal for Love and Hip Hop New York, just because we have a lot of the OGs back.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm so happy to hear your story has come full circle, and you're still active and really contributing to the culture. May not be the way that it was in '99, but you're still very much a great contributor to this hip hop culture. And I think that you're such an inspiration, especially for young women, writers, people who are seeking to get into this industry. So congratulations on your career. I think that this interview has been so informative and inspiring for me. For any of our listeners, for any of our viewers, where can they find you at, Kim?
They can find me. I'm Kim Osorio 1 on Instagram, and that's with all O's, KIMOSORIO, the number 1, and Twitter. And I think I'm Kim Osorio 1 across all social media.
Any last thoughts you want to leave us with?
I would just, want to inspire everyone during this very trying and unprecedented time to really focus on themselves, focus on all the things that you can't do when you're out in the streets and just too busy to get to work, and try to come out of this time with, just some real focus on yourself and your profession and other things that you want to do to follow your dreams.
Kim, it's been my pleasure. I'm sure people are going to listen to this and find so many great gems and inspiration. I appreciate you, and you are a true power move maker. Thanks for gracing us with your presence today.
Thank you for having me.
What's up, guys? Thanks for sticking with me to the end of the video. Truly appreciate you. If you like anything you heard here today, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you know anybody that can benefit from this message, feel free to share. Peace and love.